Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome again to your favorite show. Well, at least I hope so. This is another special one. I think that we've had a series of very interesting and very special guests, and today is no different. We've got a special guest. But before we do that, I would like to thank you a lot, actually, because a lot of you are subscribing, a lot of you are sharing, and you are liking. And your comments, we take them seriously. The whole purpose of doing this show is not necessarily for us to agree, but it's for us to engage. So it doesn't matter what you write, as long as it's an opinion, please share it, and please continue to subscribe and continue the support. Otherwise, today it's a very special individual that we have, Mukoma Briggs, a political economist and a whole lot of other things, but you run around Africa quite a bit.
Yes, I do.
Yeah, and at the moment in Dakar, Senegal.
So
have I pronounced it very, correctly? Because usually they have a problem with how we pronounce their cities.
100% correct. So currently I serve as the programs director for Trust Africa. And Trust Africa is a Pan-African foundation that is headquartered in Dakar, Senegal. Working on advancing equitable development on the continent, promoting democratic governance, and strengthening African philanthropy. We are a foundation that was seeded by Ford Foundation a few years ago, 2006. Ford was generous enough to make a commitment of $30 million to start an African foundation. And the big idea in creating Trust Africa was to say those who are closest and most affected by the developmental challenges that we are trying to solve on the continent must also be at the center of defining the priorities and creating the solutions. And this was in a context where there was a great deal of skepticism and cynicism about Africa's potential in general. You would find a respected magazine. Okay,
I'm going to cut you short there. This guy is quite excited about us.
Yes, I am. I've been looking forward to this conversation, as you know.
Fantastic. That's what we like to hear. But as you can see and as you can tell, this is somebody who actually knows what they're talking about.
Unlike us.
Yeah, and so we're looking forward to this. But before we get into that, maybe you can explain what you're drinking.
So I'm drinking a Jameson. I'm not by any stretch of the imagination a connoisseur. I know you have a resident connoisseur when it comes to these drinks. But Jameson is my drink of choice. Okay. From the basic point that I see myself as a people's person. And I find
and this whiskey is a people's person's whiskey.
Accessible?
Really? I find Jameson to be not accessible, to be very approachable. So this is a very approachable whiskey. You don't need a sophisticated, super sophisticated palate to appreciate this. It's smooth. It's triple distilled. You can relate immediately. You don't need like a long period to build a relationship with a Jameson. So
what do you say to that?
Here I am.
Look, Jameson is a staple amongst whiskey drinkers. I think it's very reliable. A lot of people like it. It also tends to be cheap and cheerful. It's not too dear. It's so it's accessible to some extent.
It's friendly to my pocket, so definitely I confirm that.
Although this particular version, the Black Barrel, is a bit less accessible than the normal.
If you find me every day, I'm drinking the Irish. I think today I thought there was going to be some sharing, and I didn't want to impose my. Affinity for accessibility to the whole.
So what's the difference between a Black Barrel and an Irish?
Well, it's Irish, so the Black Barrel is just a different product in the Jameson staple. Okay. So this one, they use charred barrels, so it imparts a different kind of flavor. It's smooth. It's better than your entry level Jameson, for sure. But it's an easy drinking whiskey. Some whiskeys are complex and rich, and you really need to have a a sensitive palate to appreciate them
Or
properly.
have downloaded the book on Google.
You have your resident connoisseur there, so yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, what are you having?
So I'm having Mosi wine. I recently had the pleasure of attending a wine tasting, and so Mosi Wines was founded by Zimbabwean Joseph Ntafana. I don't know whether you. I think I've spoken about the documentary Blind Ambition, where the Zimbabwean sommelier team did very well at the international competition, and it turns out his son, his name is Tinashe, by the way.
Oh, right.
He's also a sommelier. And he was the one who took us through the wine tasting, and he was really, really good. And I just thought I'd get a Mosi wine today. So shout out to Tinashe. And
Oh, fantastic.
Very sophisticated thing you've just done there.
but yeah, Tinashe knows. I like
He loves his toys.
I'm a gadget guy.
He loves his toys.
I guess this is the moment where we get to
Be indulged. I'm having a Ugandan because of this show, and it's on Africa. I'm having a Ugandan coffee and water.
What can you say about that?
It's actually very good. I think that the Ugandans have got something right. I think they're at the right side of the equator, and the yields there are usually very, very good. And I think it's better than what we had the last time. What did we have? There's this this one, yeah. This was Kenyan coffee.
Oh, nice.
But it was very, very weak. Whereas this is, I think, much stronger.
But so how do you
Spring Valley?
how do you
Yes.
sleep though if you take coffee
Well-
this late in the day?
Today's going to be a long night, right?
Oh, you're gonna watch the rugby?
Yeah. So. And tell us about that, hey? Because you're in All Blacks, and we are the ones in black.
Yeah.
What happened to you?
Yeah, look, I must, be very honest and say that coming into this World Cup, we didn't look like a great team. It's actually a very competitive World Cup so far, and on a good day, any team can beat us. Although
And
I
by
think-
us, you mean the All Blacks?
yeah, but it looks like we're peaking at the right time. We had a fantastic game last week against
Ireland. Yeah, so I was very conflicted because I'm an All Blacks fan, but I'm an Irish whiskey person. So I'm not a very big rugby fan.
So who's your
but
money on?
I follow when it comes to. I'm putting my money on All Blacks.
On All Blacks.
I'm thoroughly
Really?
invested now. The interesting thing is that my son, who's a big rugby fan, was supporting Ireland.
Okay. That must be heartbreaking because
It was. And
a nail biter.
you saw the very end of it, how Ireland was just like coming and really pushing hard.
That's
and
true.
I mean, it was a thriller.
Yeah,
Yeah,
all the teams. Yeah, I think you are quite right. I mean, even Argentina.
They could surprise us.
Yeah.
Tonight. It's unlikely, but it's possible.
Yeah, unlikely, but they've played very well so far.
Uh-huh.
Even France, I was actually more impressed with.
France beat us in
the French
in the group stages.
They very good, and it was just unfortunate that they lost to South Africa. But you have to give it to the South Africans, eh?
Oh, the South Africans they really came to the party. They really wanted it. I mean, did you see?
Do they
that
have what it
touchdown?
takes? Do they have what it takes to get to the final
Yeah,
and
they've
to
got
win?
They've got what it takes to get to the final and win. It remains to be seen whether they actually put it off.
Okay. Well, it'll be good for them, right?
then-
Not just for
Consecutive.
them, for the whole
consecutive and also
continent.
three wins.
Yeah.
3 World Cup wins.
No, this will be their fourth, I think.
Fourth, okay.
Yeah, but it
And the
will be
All
their first
Blacks?
one consecutively.
Okay, and the All Blacks how many?
also have 3 cups. So whoever, if either the Box or the All Blacks win, it will be the first team to have 4 trophies in their cabinet.
Interesting. Let us know who you're supporting. And then also, as you say, this would be great for Africa. And especially in sports. I mean, when you think about it, everywhere else, we're not that great. When you look at football, when you look at cricket, maybe South Africa in cricket, but in rugby, it looks like we're somewhere there.
Yeah, rugby, cricket. Those are where our chances are.
Okay, we'll get into that later on because I think it also encompasses political economy. But what I want us to talk about in the broadest of sense, And this is again to the audience so that you get some sort of idea on what we're actually going to discuss. What we want to talk about is the evolution of politics and economics. So what happened? I mean, now it's more than 60 years of independence since
for most of Africa.
For most of Africa, Ghana in 1957.
Yeah.
And we saw the first wave, and I think we're now on the third wave. And so the first wave, I would consider it as post-independence, immediately post-independence, the first presidents that we had, and we had dictators, and then we had series of coups, and then there's a second wave, which is multi-party democracy, which happened in the 90s. And then the third wave, which I think we're in, is post-2008, Africa Rising, where we're starting to hear a lot of the story around Africa. I mean, just as a backstory, I just recently read a story about Nigeria, which is going to be the fifth largest economy in 2075. You know, the fifth largest economy in the world. And I think that that's quite significant, right?
Yeah, but, when I see a forecast with a date that far in the future, like 2075, it's more than 40 years from now. At the pace that the world is changing, I struggle to take such forecasts seriously.
Well, I think it's not a focus. I think what it tells us are the dynamics of change, that there is something that's definitely happening.
Yeah.
And what I want to put to you in the broadest of sense is could you explain and could you walk us through these three ways that we've seen?
So you've provoked I guess my response on a number of things. So when you say the pace at which the world is changing, my sense is that we are at a very historic, almost unprecedented moment in history, where you have the exhaustion of most of the models and frameworks that we have used to understand society and to plan and organize society around. It's a major turning point in world history. It's a moment where there is a very unusual all-round acceptance, whoever you are talking to, that this is a moment where the last big historical wave and cycle has come to a point of termination, and a whole new wave has to emerge. You will hear, if you look at the World Economic Forum, the last 2 years, they are really talking about the world at a turning point. If you listen to the US administration, who are the current anchors of the current world order, they're talking about a whole new world order emerging. If you look at Russia, if you look at China, there's a conversation about a whole new world order emerging. So I think it's important for us, as we have a conversation like this, to be able to read the historical time and understand where we are.
That's why we have you.
Exactly, in terms of, in terms of world history. Because it's a moment of unprecedented crisis across the board. If you look at the economic front, if you look at the political front, if you look at peace and security questions, if you look at the social question in terms of the social fabric of society globally, it's an unprecedented moment of crisis. So in essence, I would say that it's a moment where long-held assumptions have been blown out of the water, and there's a new opening to really think about what then must replace what we have always known. So if you look at France, for example, one of the biggest recent things that they did is a conference on reimagining and reforming the global financial architecture. It's a conversation that's, if you look at big foundations, your Ford Foundation, your MacArthur Foundations, your Open Society Foundations, they've got a huge project, multi-million-dollar project with investors, mostly in the global north, on reimagining capitalism, because everyone knows that where we have reached is a moment where we need new ideas, we need to reimagine new values, we need to reimagine new systems in terms of what then defines the next 400, 500 years. So in a sense, that's how I am coming into the conversation, knowing that this is not a moment for management, for managing issues. And I like Harvey's definition of management as doing the right things, right? I mean, doing things right. It's a moment of leadership where we have to do the right things, define the right things, have a very keen reading of historical time.
So are you saying, and here I'm taking from what you're saying, are you saying that the first and the second wave in Africa, we were not leading, we were not doing things the right way?
So when I come back to that, the good thing is that you can generalize the African experience in a very big way. Okay. Frantz Fanon, who I rely on a lot from a political economy point of view, has seminal, he offered a very seminal text. It's called The Pitfalls of National Consciousness. And he very accurately predicted that the period after independence was going to take Africa to where we are today. And and he points to two birth defects in the post-independence project. So you had one is like an ideological crisis, and secondly it's a class crisis. And on the ideological front, he talks about the leadership that takes us to the moment of independence was rooted in nationalism as an ideology. And so as an ideology that was really about breaking down the shackles of colonialism, liberating the black population. But the task that came in on the advent of independence required a much wider ideological scope than the nationalist ideology that had led us to the moment of independence. So in a sense, you also had the exhaustion of that idea at the moment of independence, and it no longer had capacity to drive society and move society forward post the moment of independence. But secondly, on the class side, and this is really applicable in Zimbabwe at independence, but even today, you had a state that was created for a particular class. Now, if you look at the Rhodesian state, for example, this was a state that had been created for industrialists, financiers, agrarian capital, and everything was organized on the basis of that class configuration. And the class that inherits the state at 1980 was a class that was made of teachers, petty traders,
guys who had failed their form twos,
people who
petty thieves,
people a lot of petty thieves, people who did not have a long history of association with capital and accumulation. So when they come in, they are not designed to, as a class, to be an anchor for a state like that, which necessarily means one of the biggest projects that was not undertaken was a project to transform the state. So what happens is when you bring in these petty thieves and teachers and people who had been abducted to go into Mozambique and Tanzania and all of that, it became natural that they would cannibalize the state. They will use the state as an instrument of accumulation. But also they were looking at what was happening globally. They were looking at their class models globally were people who actually had a long history of association with capital. So for us, they start at the very end, and this is not my original words. It's actually Fanon who says that the class that inherits the state in our case 1980, it starts at the very end, about where you are now looking at ostentatious expenditure, accumulation, but they also position themselves to be an intermediary for international capital. They are not really looking at themselves driving a vision for transforming society so that our economy, our resources can serve the wider generality of our society, but they are positioning themselves to be almost like brokers, and then they benefit themselves.
Okay, so corruption
is endemic in the post-independent African state. And if you look at, because you asked another question to say, so what then explains the shift to authoritarianism, right? If you look at the Zimbabwe example, I always like to say that Zimbabwe is a trailer. South Africa is the movie, if you really want to understand what's playing out. So you have a state that invests in trying to expand and meet.
Sorry, just so that we capture that. Zimbabwe is
a trailer, it's a preview
to a movie. But we've seen this movie
out
before.
Now. To some extent, yes. But I think
this. So this is a remake.
We've seen it in Kenya.
I
can give you Kenya as
that's
an
exactly
example.
what I want us to do.
Yeah.
So to correctly position it,
Yeah.
can you please tell us this movie so that we can understand the trailer and then we can understand.
So this movie starts with euphoria at independence. It starts with a blank check given to the new leaders who come in at independence. It also starts with a crisis of expectations, because the generality of our people had expectations of what independence must deliver in terms of their livelihoods and their upliftment. In Zimbabwe, if you look the first decade, there's an effort to meet those expectations in terms of expansion of health, of education, taking infrastructure beyond certain enclaves that had been prioritized under the colonial state. But by the time we are hitting 1990, it's becoming very clear that as a result of the endemic corruption that I spoke about is actually definitional and fully predicted in how the African state, post-independence state was going to play out. There were no resources to be able to fulfill the aspirations and the needs that were before the state. So that's what takes us to structural adjustment in 1990.
Yeah.
As a way of trying to unlock international financing to really come into helping a situation. But as we know, structural adjustment actually took us even deeper in terms of the problems, because it meant deregulation even of labor. We called it flexible labor regimes. So it was now easier to fire workers. It called...
Why do you think that's a problem?
It's a problem. My explanation will speak to that.
Okay.
Yeah, in total, it spoke of reducing the role of the state to a very minimum role, which ultimately meant a more coercive state. So reducing the state to its coercive apparatus. The state withdraws from funding higher education or education from funding healthcare. It is a very bad thing for a country with a history like Zimbabwe, where the history is a history of deprivation. And for that one, I can speak with a great deal of authority, because I was a student leader. I was a president of a students' movement. And I know what allowing access to education can do in terms of transforming individual citizens, but also transforming society at large.
Okay, so we're gonna push back a lot on this.
I would love to.
And we're gonna push back with a lot of stats. So while it is true that post-independence, so when you look at 1980 right through to 1990, anyone who was privileged, and it was actually a privilege to have been school-going age at that time, benefited from the state funding the education. But because of that cost, what has resulted is 30 years later, the kids who are now born today, who don't have that privilege of having grown up in the 80s, are not going to school. Are you aware that 50% of the youth are actually not in school? The girls,
aware of that. Yeah.
6 out of 10 girls are not in school at all.
I'm 100%.
So, and the reason why that is the case is because the state, in its formation in 1980, spent a lot of money borrowing so that you could go to school for free. But unfortunately, it prejudiced the school-going kids today and in the future, because it's going to be very difficult to get these kids to go to school again. You took all the cheese.
I'd love to hear more,
Here's another way of thinking about it, which is it was a bad idea to make the education free in the first instance. Even if you thought that it was good to fund it for parents that couldn't pay for the kids' education. If you got free education in the 1980s, upon graduation from university, you should have gotten a bill from the state to say, look, this is what it cost to put you through school, whether it's $30,000 worth or 50,000 or whatever it is. You don't have to pay us now. You just graduated. You don't have any money, but you've got 50 years of your career in front of you, in which you're actually going to work and earn income for yourself. So, and over and above what you owe the state in terms of taxes, you know, we're going to figure out a formula where we claw back what we paid for you, so we can pay for the next generation.
I actually like what you're saying, and it has never been tried out. So it's a very innovative thought that I want us to like really put at the table. I think before we started the show, I was saying one of my biggest stories is showing up, in a bar one time, and I see drinks coming to my table. And I start to ask the waitresses, where are these drinks coming from? And then they say, oh, it's that engineer. And he comes to my table and he says, President, I just want to honor you for the struggles that you led for us to access education. And he says he left his village in Gutu with a letter from his sabuk that said, to whom it may concern, this is our child. Please take care of him. Help us take care of him. And when we were protesting to access education, because we were a generation that the government was beginning to try to bring in loans to fund education and to cut off payouts that were being given to students for your subsistence.
A lot of which was going to Jameson.
Yeah. So let me tell you. So let me just lend the story for you to see where I am coming from. So this guy says, all the protests that we did, and in my capacity as the president at that point of the Student Representative Council led, he said, I showed up because I was fighting for my life. If the government had gone ahead to introduce fees at that time and cut off payout, he was going back to the village. Because of the struggles we fought, he managed to complete his education, became a civil engineer. Now he's a big civil engineer in this town. He's developing properties, he's employing hundreds of people himself. After he finished, the first thing he did was to go and dig a borehole at the Sabuk's house, who had written this letter, and then put another one at his family's house, and draw electricity and all of that. So
we call those anecdotes.
So you can see how the fact that he managed to access education has transformed society. But
that's anecdotal.
What I like, no, but it's generalized. It's actually also even why.
What we're saying is, why we're saying it's anecdotal is because in the entire village, over generations, over 100 years, the only people who were able to enjoy this benefit were your generation, right? So there's this one particular generation. So out of 10. Let's consider 100 years or 1,000 years, and let's consider those 10 generations. And only one generation gets to enjoy the benefits and gets to be civil engineers.
No, it shouldn't be.
But
it shouldn't be
the
one
rest
generation.
Well, that's the problem, because it's not sustainable.
So we must
do things
it's not sustainable.
So let's talk about the sustainability part of it. The sustainability part of it, first of all, I really like it's at the ideation level to then say, how do we make sure that you've become this successful, you are now contributing to the sustainability of this fund. That has not been done. So there, I really want to acknowledge that the state has not done that, and there's room to think about that. But secondly, it's a question of priorities. For me, education has to be one of those priorities. If you look at how the structure of our expenditure as a state, if we were to prioritize education, because I'm putting forward a simple argument that says you must prioritize the education, especially of those that were previously disenfranchised and those that cannot afford to pay for it today, because it makes them competitive global citizens. They can be anywhere, go anywhere in the world, and they'll be able to earn and they'll be able to advance themselves. It's the most certain way of breaking out of the cycle.
The more reason why they should pay for it.
Yeah, so you can come up with a formula that then says those who have been supported, how do they contribute back? There were elements here where they would bond you for a certain period of years after you've been financed by the state, but I don't think it was ever thought through properly.
Sustainably. Okay.
And so if you look at the US, for example, public education is free.
I want to push
good
back
quality.
strongly.
It's very good quality public education, and it's free of charge.
One of the ideas in the modern lexicon that frustrates me is this idea that there are things that are free, right? So firstly, wherever, even in places where we, the consensus is there's free education or there's free healthcare or there's free public service, it's not actually free. Somebody is paying for it, right? So when you say public education is free in the US, for example, up until high school, the taxpayers in the suburbs where the schools are located actually pay for it. The property taxes fund the public schools in those places. So somebody is paying for it, right? There's nothing that's free. The question is who's paying for it and how are they paying for it? And then
are the people sustainable?
And are the people who are paying for it the ones who are benefiting from the service? You see, And when you talk about developed countries like the United States and Scandinavia, Scandinavia is probably a better example for our conversation because it's completely free from preschool all the way up to university. In fact, in Denmark, the state, over and above paying your tuition, gives you a stipend of $1,000 a month to be in school instead of working. Right? Yeah. So, but one of the things, especially when we're sitting here in Harare, thinking about it from a Zimbabwean perspective, that we need to be very much alive to, is the fact that those guys have the money. We don't. You see, they can afford it. They
can afford to make. Let's be clear. They can afford to make
challenging that
decision.
But you see, I'm challenging the notion that we don't have the money. No, I challenge that.
Okay, where's the money? Where's the money?
So look at. You've just mentioned that taxation is contributing towards the financing of public education in the US, and that's actually one of the historical roles of taxation. It's redistribution of wealth in society. That's why sometimes we can tax. There are movements right now that are looking at how can we tax billionaires and the super wealthy so that we can invest in lifting up society in general. So if you look at Zimbabwe, there's nothing that stops us from being able to use
we don't have the money.
No.
We don't have the taxes.
No, wait. I want to give you an example. To use our tax resources to invest in education and healthcare. I was sitting yesterday with.
It's not enough.
Let me tell you. I was sitting with guys in the health sector, and they were explaining to me a situation where at one point Harare Hospital went without water, and the bill was $10,000. That's the money that was needed to repair, to put in a reservoir, and to fix the leaking pipes. And if you look at what the government was spending in terms of what was being contributed by civil servants in terms of the health insurance to PISMAS, that was coming to something like $10 million a month. And if you then looked at how much you needed to run Harare Hospital every month, it was something like $1.6 million. Pari was something
Mkoma Briggs, we're not interested in your anecdotes.
A provincial hospital would cost you $300,000 to run. So the formulations that we develop can actually deal with the money question.
Okay, I'm going to push back a bit. We don't like dealing with anecdotes. And we don't make public policy based on anecdotes. So yes, that's a sad story, and yes, it's a moving story, but we can't make public policy based on anecdotes.
We need data.
We need data.
Yeah. So what I've given you is data, right?
No,
run a hospital,
that's an anecdote.
$1.6 million a month. That's not enough.
No. To actually run. Okay, so the actual statistics are to run healthcare system in Zimbabwe, we need at least $2 billion, and already. About $500 million
over what period?
No, in a year. Per annum. And if you were to do that, that would be 50% of our tax money.
Do you know where that $2 billion, most of it is going to? It's administration cost. It's not even going to the person who is providing the service to you as the doctor or as the nurse. It's the administrative apparatus that's taking.
We have the breakdown.
That's taking, but I'm telling you that because I've sat down with guys in the health sector. I can tell you the majority of that $2 billion is administrative costs.
It's going into medicines because actually to administer, you need medicines and we just don't have a budget for it. It's going into healthcare people because when you look at nurses and doctors, we employ close to about 80,000 of them. And right now they're underpaid. So if they were to be properly paid, that's where the money is going to. So, and it's also going to infrastructure. So we haven't even talked about infrastructure because a lot of our hospitals and clinics are not up to date. The simple reason, the simple reason
Okay,
is
let's go back to the principal position. So when you say we don't have enough capital, what you're doing is you're taking us to a conversation about financing for development in Africa in general. And this is a very well established
let's go into
conversation
because that's actually
on
what
the
we want to talk about. Yeah. So please go ahead.
And I
So can I just set a preamble to that conversation because we've got Africa, which is undeveloped or is less developed than the developed world, and you've got the developed world. And I so one of the things I find very interesting when we have conversation about developing in Africa is this idea that somehow the state is at the epicenter of this process and is driving it and bringing everybody else along. But if you actually look at places in the world that are developed, it was not the state that drove development. It was industrialists, it was entrepreneurs, it was financiers and free and merchants. So it was free market capitalism. If you look at the United States, for example, before they built the interstate road system, most of the road network in the US was built by private players.
Including the railways.
The railways were built by private players. The robber, I don't know why they're called robber barons. It's always vexed me, because these are the men who built America: Andrew Carnegie, Cornelius Vanderbilt, John D. Rockefeller, Henry Ford. And JP Morgan, right?
Yeah.
So it wasn't a bunch of guys sitting in the cabinet room at the White House directing progress.
No, but you are not. Go and take a look at it. You actually not. That's actually not true. If you look at the US, the state is the one that invested massively in public infrastructure. But it was not the state that created its own companies to go and do it. They commissioned or tendered private players to do it. So if you look at the history of infrastructure development in the US, even at its very earliest stage, it was private players that were bidding. And the state would say you do 100 kilometers here, you do 50 kilometers here, and then you get paid for that. Even if you look at Eisenhower's his legacy is the development of public infrastructure in the US. All these highways that you're seeing, that's all public financing. The same thing with the railways in the UK. So the state has always played a critical role in terms of the development of public infrastructure and the financing of it. I don't know of any example where you did not have the state playing that. But look at the question of research and development in the US. It's the state that's most heavily invested in research and in development. And the private sector comes in most of the times at the point of innovation, taking a product to the market. But the research and development part, the riskier part of the development process, you have massive state investment. So for us here, and it takes us back to the story that I was telling in terms of our decline in the 90s, we had this premature withdrawal of the state in supporting a development agenda.
Withdrawal.
See, exactly. That's exactly what it was. So you know what we did? We removed all tariffs to do with the importation of textiles into this industry. And that's how Contextiles, you remember Contextiles, that huge company, it employed thousands of people. That's how they collapsed. We withdrew our funding into these other areas that I was already talking about in terms of education and health, and it created this crisis. But what then happens is when you have thousands of workers being laid off, because you're asking how is the issue of flexible labor regimes relevant to the conversation, it became easy to fire these workers, because before that, it was extremely difficult to fire a worker. Once you had all of these people on the street, what it did is that post-1990, by mid-1995, just look at the history of Zimbabwe. That's when you start to see very serious protests. In fact, the biggest protest by ZCTU was 1992, when ASAP, or structural adjustment, was beginning to bite. And these were very limited protests. They were speaking to very economic demands. They were not political protests. By 1995, we had the biggest informal sector protest in this country. 1996, we had the
when
biggest.
you say informal sector,
vendors.
vendors.
Vendors. Just go and look at the history. 1995. 1996, we had the biggest and longest civil servants strike in this country. For the first time, teachers and nurses and all of these civil servants were on strike for years. By 1997, 1998, you had food riots in this country. You had people dying in Mavuku,
So had you seen this movie before?
So that's what I'm saying. So let me just land it. So what you see then is these economic protests are building and they're challenging the state now. But initially they are posing very economic demands. And at a certain point in this country, it was 1998. That's when you had what was known as the Working People's Convention, that then said, as workers and all working people, we must actually create a political alternative. Because we're literally a one-party state until 1998. And the movement of democratic change is launched in this country in 1999 as the first real threat to the ruling party. So what you see happening in 1998 and 1999 is the generalization of limited economic protest by vendors, by students, by civil servants into a political demand that it had actually said Mugabe must go. So when the state was faced with this demand now, the response was to dig in. The response was to close the civic space. And that's how you see an economic crisis turning into a political crisis.
Was that unique to Zimbabwe?
It's not unique to Zimbabwe. We are seeing it playing out in South Africa right now.
Okay.
So look at...
Before, could you explain where else it had happened, where it had happened exactly as
it was? I mean, I'm giving you South Africa, but if you look at Kenya, it's the same thing, right?
Please explain it to us.
So if you look at Kenya, throughout the 70s, the state fails to address the social economic needs and aspirations of that society. The 80s, people like Raila, that's when they made their name. They were in prison because they were protesting against the economic hardships. And Moi was clamping down. So you actually see a very direct link between the economic crisis turning into a political crisis when these demands are generalized beyond limited economic demands of saying reduce our taxes, increase our salaries, give us payouts as students, put more money into education, into healthcare. The instinctive response of the post-colonial state is repression, is to introduce, in our case in Zimbabwe, was the NGO bill that was coming in the around 2000. It was to undermine different institutions of the state, so that you generally do not have a democratic environment that's allows for expression and everything. You are seeing the same thing playing out in South Africa right now.
So I have a different perspective, which is, I think, one of the fundamental problems in Zimbabwe and South Africa and other parts of Africa is our attitude towards labor policy. So if you look at the economic miracle of China over the last 50 years, one of the things that underpins that success is 996. The average factory worker in China worked from 9 in the morning till 9 p.m., 6 days a week. Hard work.
We don't need to be there. We don't need to be there. Do you know why we have Workers' Day? Do you know where Workers' Day comes from? May 1st. Do you know where that comes from?
Before we
that
get there,
was a big struggle by workers in the US, in Chicago in particular, for a 5-day working week that was 9 to 5. That's where that Workers' Day comes from.
So I
workers actually died. They were killed in a
I need to
protest
contextualize.
for Workers' Day. So this 996, no, we don't. With the technology that we have today, we do not need to have people working 996, as you're saying. The progressive part of this world is actually moving to a 4-day working week. Watch this space.
They're going to be poorer.
In the next 5-10 years,
I don't know.
a 4-day working week is going to become quite
gentlemen,
a big issue.
Gentlemen,
yeah.
I think the import of what Rufaro is trying to say, okay, and I know that he's thrown the gauntlet for a particular reason, but what the import I'm getting and what we need to contextualize is why was flexible working hours such a problem, such a big problem in Africa, that it resulted in workers' economic issues becoming political, whereas in Asia, and it's not just China, it's Southeast Asia, everywhere across Asia, the idea of flexible hours was very much amenable. They were able to work, and China has lifted 600 million people out of poverty with flexible hours. And yet the same thing in Africa, it's a problem. So I want to put less our personal ideas to it, but I want us to understand why in Africa workers became political, whereas everywhere else workers did not become political.
Yeah, because I think there is. So it takes us now to this whole thing about political economy, and why I even think it's a stronger lens of looking at society and trying to organize and move society forward than economics specifically or politics separately. Because political economy takes you to the interaction of the political system and the economic system, and one influence the other. Yeah. Whereas most of the times we look at these as silos and we separate them. So there is, obviously, that's why I spoke about the expectations of independence after people had made all these sacrifices to 1980.
Asia was also colonized.
There were certain expectations, and I would think, because if you really look at resources, this is our shared inheritance, right? So people like me come into the conversation with a political commitment that says we can uplift everyone. We can create a society that is more just, and that comes from how we are being really prudent in the management of our resources. So what happens, look at the labor broking. I just want to give you the labor broking system, like in South Africa, for example. You will be employed by a labor broker who does not subscribe to, here in Zim, if you work for a certain period, I think at one point it used to be 3 months, you then have to become a permanent employee. You are now entitled to health insurance, you're entitled to retirement, you are entitled, and if you are to be fired, there has to be a procedure that protects you. So all of that comes from this imagination of a more just society that actually invests in looking at those who are on the margins and who are most vulnerable.
So, do you mind if we just just examine that from an efficacy point of view?
Let's do that.
Because the alternative is that.
But we haven't answered the previous question, and I want us
so
first
so
answer
I'm coming exactly.
Okay. Let's answer the previous question.
Yeah.
Why did the workers in China and Southeast Asia they impressed upon their economic rights and they worked flexible hours and they're now out of poverty.
I don't,
a lot of hours out of poverty. Yeah. Same model in Africa. The workers then become political.
So I don't quite get what you mean when you said in China they worked flexible hours. The only thing that comes to mind for me is that in China you had a much
flexible
firmer,
labor practices.
Yeah, exactly. So you could hire and
be
fire.
fired
You could hire
at the
and
drop of a
fire
hat.
at will. You had no protection, right?
Yes.
So for me,
And the guy in China didn't think it was a problem.
but
and now he's out of poverty. The guy in Africa thought
Yeah.
it was a problem.
Yeah.
And he's still in
He's
poverty.
still in poverty.
yeah. So it's not necessarily that, because even here there are people who have benefited from stronger labor regimes. Who have been protected from being fired from work, who have had healthcare, who have had pensions. I think you're seeing the current
Yeah,
conversation.
but if you zoom out, right?
So,
Whenever you have these very tough labor regulations, what happens is that employers are less reluctant to add employees. The economy doesn't grow as quickly. So you have a small coterie of people who are employed under all these protections, and they have a fantastic time. But the vast majority of people who are looking for work,
Yeah, look, I think ultimately you want to have, that's why you've got a tripartite format here. You want to have a conversation across the board. Because if you try and come up with a solution on the basis of what the employer wants only, or what the worker wants only, or what the state wants only, you will have dysfunctionality, and you'll actually have a broken society.
But we can look at the real world case study.
Yeah,
Yeah,
exactly.
let's hear
Even our case here in Zim, it requires that because what is the biggest motivation of getting into business for you guys coming from the private sector? Is it not profit?
Profit.
And maximum profit to that maximum
Absolutely.
profit, right? So and it takes us again to that question of political economy, politics, economics, where the decision making that happens in terms of allocation of resources that are limited to needs and wants that are completely unlimited is a very political issue. What you want as a private sector guy is not the same that the worker wants, but I would recommend to you.
Are you saying the worker is not better off when I am making profit?
No. So what normally happens is if you look at the share of capital, or the share of profits that's going to the workers versus the share that is.
Why is the employee interested in the share of profit?
Can I give you a very example? I mean, a specific
You can become
example.
a
It's a little bit tragic. Look at Marikana. Do you remember what Marikana was about? It was about those workers demanding 500 rands increase on their salaries, and Lonmin saying, "No, we cannot give you this 500 rands increase on your salary." 500 rands is what? I mean, help me. Who's a mathematician here?
Yeah.
I mean, how much is that in US dollars?
It's about $25.
$25. Yeah.
$25. So you're aware that 35.
No, but
I
so
think
what
it was,
happens?
No, wait, it was 35 because Lonmin argued that they could not give this money. When you go to the finance for development conversation, we then looked at Lonmin in terms of how it is organized globally. And we brought in, I did a lot of work that brought in COSATU and other labor union actors in South Africa. And what you see in terms of Lonmin's global structure was that there was clearly base erosion and profit shifting. That's how Lonmin would argue against giving this increment. If there was greater transparency in terms of the revenues that were coming in and the profits that were being made, Lonmin could have awarded
so
workers
profits
more
and the
money.
losses and the losses. Are the workers willing to take on the losses?
That's a very interesting question.
Because
That's a very interesting question.
Everywhere where there's profit, there's double losses.
Yeah, that's
So
a
the
very
risk
interesting-
is,
but you look at
when you have a profit,
but you look
it's
at
great.
them as stakeholders. You look at them as
But they're not
stakeholders.
stakeholders,
But
they're
they're not.
employees.
Yeah, I didn't call them stockholders.
Yeah.
I call them stakeholders, right? I recommend to you Paul Collier, The Future of Capitalism book. He's not even talking about disbanding capitalism. He's talking about rescuing capitalism.
No, but
he's going back.
I'm amazed you have this perspective because so your foundation comes from the Ford Foundation, and one of the remarkable things about Henry Ford is he introduced the $5 a day wage, right, which was much higher than any minimum wage, and the other the competitors in the automotive sector were very upset about this. But he didn't make this because he had a big heart and he wanted all his employees to live well. He looked at productivity, he looked at staff turnover, and he said, you know what, it actually makes sense for us to outbid the market, pay $5 a day, and in the longer term, we're going to do better. And much more recently, Amazon did the same thing. Amazon, across the board in the US, where they employ 1.4 million people, the federal minimum wage is about $7.35. They just said, you know what, we're going to pay $15 an hour across the board, plus healthcare. And anybody who wants to go to college will pay for that.
So
too.
you see, that's the context. I lived and worked in the US for 5 years. And it's important for us to be contextual. In the US, if you are not employed, you actually get unemployment benefits. And your unemployment benefits is substantive. Pregnant women in the US actually they get checks that they can go and cash. It's controlled now, but it allows you to buy healthy foods. You can't buy alcohol and things like that. In the US. Yeah, so it's a card, right? Yeah. But you see, and if you are in South Africa, look at South Africa. This is probably the most celebrated economy on the continent. Do you know what the unemployment rate in South Africa is currently?
So about 37%.
No, way bigger than that.
Youth unemployment is about
50%.
50%, but general unemployment is about
So
37%.
youth unemployment is around 60%. If you bring in those who have given up in terms of looking for work, it's actually around 71%. And every year you've got 700,000 youths that are joining the labor market. And wait, let me just finish it. You need South Africa's GDP to be growing by 6% every year for it to be able to absorb the 700,000 that are joining the labor market every year. Last year, South Africa's GDP grew by 2%. It's trending downwards to 1% and lower right now. So this is the economy we are celebrating. When we talk about the Great Depression, the largest, highest unemployment was 25%.
Okay, gentlemen, I need us to move.
But I just want to add something to the South African example, because I think it's really important.
And then we're going to close this chapter so that we move on to the next one.
I will make the case that one of the reasons why growth in South Africa has been anemic is because they don't have at-will employment, because you can't just hire and fire, because once you employ someone, you have to check all these boxes because there are all these rules and regulations. That's why the economy is struggling. If, without actually adding a single dollar of investment stimulus, if you just removed all the labor regulations and you said, look, guys, at will, I think that economy will take off.
You need a social dialogue, even in South Africa.
Gentlemen, I want us to move because there's a lot of ground that we need to cover.
Yeah.
So the second ground that I need to cover, because I think you succinctly put this, that it's a trailer, it's a movie, but this movie has been done before. If we look at Nigeria, Kenya, elsewhere across Africa, can you please relate the relationship between business and the state?
Yeah.
So you did a very good job in making us understand the relationship between the workers and the state. But I want us, because this show is a business show.
Yeah, exactly.
I want us to let's zero in on the relationship between business and the state across Africa. How has it evolved before we come down to some?
So let me then just land it. We talked about how an economic crisis transitions into a political crisis. That's our example, and it's the example everywhere. But when you have that economic crisis and the political crisis protracted, as it has been in our case here in Zim, and in a lot of African countries, it goes even deeper to become a social crisis. And when we're talking about it becoming a social crisis, we are really talking about the breakdown in the fabric of society, the breakdown in values, the breakdown in relationships, solidarity, the breakdown in trust. So if you look at where Zimbabwe is right now, we've moved from economic political to now a social crisis where there's no trust. There's no trust between business and employees, business and the state and
Have we
society.
seen this also in Africa?
You see it everywhere. That's why I was saying this is a preview or a trailer. You would know that even when we have to look at our currency, if Mutuli was to make a statement today or ED was to make a statement today, it will have very limited impact, and sometimes it will not even be based on the objective parameters of that statement. It will be based on very subjective questions of a lack of trust in society. So you get to that point where you now have a breakdown of society. And to me, that's a very deep level of a crisis. And that's why business must also, I think, or at least in my view, have an interest in saying, how do you not get to this point of a social crisis? Because that's where trust is broken. Okay. Values are broken. One of the biggest complaints right now in business is that they can't get good young people working for them, because you've got a pipeline that's coming in that is very cynical about society, that does not have values,
so are you saying,
that wants to get rich quickly and today.
I want us to zero in. Are you saying that in Nigeria, in Kenya, there was a time when
exactly
business
what
people were targeted, businesses were nationalized, they were dispossessed of their business, farmers' land was taken from black business people?
So I'm saying that's exactly what happened in Nigeria, in Kenya. When the state could not solve these issues, it became authoritarian. And then they were presiding over a festering wound. And that wound created... If you go to Nigeria, I've gone to Nigeria several times. For me to move around in Nigeria, it's blue light escort at the back, blue light escort at the front. Because of abductions. Do you know a country that has more abductions than in Nigeria? I've worked with people in my office in Nigeria. For you to move to go and bury your parent in the village, and you are known that you work for an international organization, you are UN, you are Ford, you are this, you need to have all of this. It's a measure of a breakdown
therefore,
of society.
Can you explain to us how they moved? How is it possible that now you have
I'll tell you. So if you look at let's look at Kenya. I think Kenya will be a good example for us.
Okay.
Yeah. So Kenya goes through all of this that Zimbabwe has gone through, and what you see happening in Kenya is the evolution of a politics where the political elite initially get into a compact that says, look, we do need a minimum agreement in terms of protection. Elite. Yeah, the political elite.
So I think in a political class or in your NGO circles, they might understand it. But for our audience, you're going to have to dumb it down for us.
Yeah.
When you say political elite, what actually...
So Kenya is really organized on the basis of ethnic nations, which is a very interesting point to ponder for Zimbabwe. Okay. So the Kikuyu are a nation. The Kambas, where I married in Kenya, my wife is Kamba. They are a nation. They're the fourth largest. The Luos are the second largest, where Raila is. They are a nation. The Luyas are a nation. The Kisi are a nation. The current president, Ruto, my God, it's escaping me, but he belongs to one of the nations.
Okay.
So what you see happening in Kenya...
Is a nation just a euphemism for tribe?
I prefer calling them nations, right? Okay. Yeah. What you see happening in Kenya right now is that they've created room for a conversation amongst these nations. And what it has done is that it has created locally anchored politics in Kenya. So, and that's a big difference now between Kenya and Zimbabwe. Because if you look at Kenya, these nations, if you are now the elite, like you've risen to be a noticeable figure,
are you defining
and a
elite
representative
by power,
and a voice,
or money? Power or money?
It's both. It's both, because they usually overlap. Because most of these nations actually have what they call like an elders council that emerges from the Kikuyus, that emerges from the Luos, from the Kambas. The Kisis. So you have this. But what they do is when they know that politics is local, when they go to the national space, those who are lucky enough, smart enough to rise and be representative, go there to negotiate benefits for their communities. And that's where, when we met in Kenya the last time in Nairobi, and you were saying, I've put forward an argument that says Kenyan politics is interest-based, whereas Zimbabwean politics is values based,
and
its values.
I found it very illuminating.
And its values in quotes, right? In Kenya, you come up and you say, our community needs a dam, our community needs a road, our community needs the power lines to come into it, or our community needs a new cyber city. So if we are coming into negotiating a coalition before the elections, it's on the basis of that to say, when we come in, are we going to commit national resources to what we've set as priorities for our community? That's why, if you look at the Kenyan politics is very fluid. It shifts all the time. The people who were opposing each other yesterday are in bed together today. And tomorrow the same thing happens. If you look at Mudavadi, who is the current prime minister in Kenya, that was Raila's right-hand person in the last election. But right now, he is here as Ruto's prime minister. Most of the people around Ruto were actually Raitas, because they negotiated and secured these deals together with Ruto to say, when we go in, this is what we are going to be doing. Whereas when you come to Zim, we do not have even a modicum of local politics. I'm a farmer in Marondera. People in my community, they vote for the MP on the basis of what party that MP belongs to, not on the basis of what pact they have created as a local community. Same thing here in Harare and all these urban areas. People vote for a councillor on the basis that that councillor belongs to CCC, not on the basis of a conversation that has happened at a community, at a local community level, and what's going to come out of that process. So in the end, in our situation, the allegiance of the elected representative is to the hierarchy of the party. There's no accountability to the community that has elected you. They don't even care. And then you compound that with what I mentioned to you earlier as a class contradiction, that you are jetting in from Yanga to be the councillor for Borodale. You don't even have a house or a car or anything, and you're just walking into this structure that was created for a different class character.
My question is this not just the evolution of things, or are you saying that's the disconnect?
Well, for Zim, my hope is that it becomes the next level. Like, our politics becomes more locally anchored, so that even at a level of the provinces, if you are Mashonaland in the East, you know what are the issues in Mashonaland in the East, and what are you going to the national conversation. Yeah, devolution, but real devolution, not the current devolution, where the minister for the province is appointed by the president, so his allegiance is to the president. He does not need the province, the citizens in that province. Right. Same thing, a councillor in Harare does not need you. I don't know which neighborhood you come from. He does not need your support. You probably voted for someone that you do not know, but you voted for them because they had CCC on their tag. That councillor is not committed or accountable to you at all. They're accountable to the hierarchy of CCC. Okay. So that's a big distortion in our politics.
So zeroing down again on business, and I need you to dumb it down. We're not intellectuals. We're not at a university. I want you to dumb it down. Right now, there's a great sense that, as far as business is concerned, this state is not amenable. It's not amenable to business ideas, and they are anti-business, anti-economic policies. If you look at the entire economic policies that they put across, there is no consensus whatsoever. There is no going to business and coming and saying, okay, these are the principles that we want. So we want to understand in Africa, where has this occurred and what's the evolution of it? Are we like, and how do we see the thawing of relations between business? Where I, as the black bourgeoisie, to use your
I did
your
not
language.
even use that language, but it's my language.
You said Frantz Fanon and
we call it, and we don't even say bourgeoisie, bourgeois. Black bourgeois.
Yeah, how do we eventually reconcile with the state?
Yeah.
With those in power. Where I
it's a
do not
very good
feel
point.
that
It's a
I'm
very
not
good
in
point.
fear. I do not operate in fear.
It's a very good point. So I spoke about the need and importance of an anchor class for post-independence, and I think that anchor class is this black bourgeois, actually, the nationalist bourgeois. People who are involved, in capital formation, and they have national interest at heart. What we have not had, I think, in Zimbabwe and in other countries, is the imagination on how we can create that anchor class. If you look at it speaks also to the incompetence and the limitations of the class that inherits the state at the moment of independence. And I mentioned earlier that they just make there's a term called comprador bourgeois, right? Yeah. Where you are just intermediaries of international capital. So it speaks to a limitation in their imagination. If you were to come to, just look at it, there's a privileging of international capital over national capital, or over the national capitalist actor in general across the continent. So when we are talking about creating incentives for investment capital, it goes to FDI, because that's what we are all chasing. We are chasing.
Zimbabwe.
No, but even in Zimbabwe, you will see versions for it. That's why I say it's a generalized issue across the continent. That's when we will talk about tax holidays. That's when and the tax incentives that are created. If you look at the Chinese money that's coming into this country, every big deal that is coming in here, there's a certain marshalling of all the ministries that happens to say we need this to go through quickly. So you bring in those who are involved with regulation, taxation, all the different ministries.
You form ZETA.
They come together very, very quickly. But I do not know of a single case of when that is done for your local business actor. So there's no imagination and support that then emerges to support your local business actor. And in the end, the reason why I keep saying this is it's important to generalize it. You've got examples, continental and globally, where you have what's called round tripping, where there's a realization that the incentives and accommodations are created for foreign direct investment. So it's actually more strategic for you to take your capital out, put it into Mauritius, create a shell company in Mauritius, and then bring it back as FDI. The treatment you get then is amazing. Look at Strive, for example. He's built this massive telecommunications business in Zim. You look at Econet, you look at Cassava, you look at Liquid Telecom. They, at least to my knowledge, there's never been an instance where we're like, okay, this is now the telecoms industry bank with state support or underwriting that ensures that you get the support that you need to be competitive on the regional market or global market, or to simply say these are the incentives we are now creating for importation of telecommunications equipment.
Or to
into
just
this
listen
country.
to strive. You see, what I'm
Yeah.
saying is maybe not me, but the idea that our billionaire business person
It's more
sits in
comfortable
London
living in London.
for the last 23 years and has not even interacted with the state. You know, it's a big worry for the small business people that we are, because we are like, oh, okay, if he's targeted, what more of us?
So that's the problem now.
And why can't we
But
have
you
that
see,
conversation?
that's
The
the-
same guy
we should
has a
have-
conversation in Kenya.
We should have that, and that's where Kenya is different from us now. Unfortunately, they seem to say that under the current regime, things might go down, right? There's a bit of an authoritarian streak that's kicking in. But what explained Kenya's growth in the last 15 or so years was that elite pact that said, we are going to respect your rights as a businessman. We are going to respect your property rights. We are not going to touch your family. We are not going to. You saw what has happened in Kenya now, where Uru's kids are being touched, the family and everything. His family is now living in the UK just in this past few months. So there's a bit of a breakdown of that elite pact in Kenya. For us here, we've never had it. If you were
Who
a
starts the
businessman,
conversation? Who starts the conversation? Is it how does that conversation start?
So for me, I think that the business community in Zim is very timid, and I don't think they are a community. So that's also one of the reasons why I really like this show, and I was committed to coming to this show. I have never had a robust expression of the business community's interest in Zim, even when it comes to elections. Do you know that in the US, you'll have chambers of business coming out before a presidential vote and saying, for this next election, we are voting for so and so on the basis of 1, 2, 3, 4. So for us here, you don't have that level of expression and championing of business interest. And it's not even just it does not apply just with regards to the state, even when it comes to the opposition. So sometimes you'll end up with a wholesale blank check granted, but there's no clear articulation of interest, because the whole equation for me, where it will balance is when we all put our interests on the table as regions, as communities, as sectors, and we say, this is what we want. And we are very unapologetic about it. And we will support you or oppose you on the basis of how you are aligning with our interests.
Okay, so this is an interesting topic, and I think we should have a rabbit hole on it. Very interesting.
Let's go deep into it.
Let's go deep into it. But I think the producer has said we must wrap up. Ladies and gentlemen, I thought, this is very illuminating, and I hope that you found this as illuminating as I did. What I take away from this is about business interests, is about the national questions, it's about the trailer and the movie. And what we're going to do, because there's a lot that we actually didn't touch on, is we're going to have a secondary rabbit hole where, again, we're going to speak a lot more about these issues. But let's hear your comments. Whether you disagree or whether you agree, please share, please like, and please subscribe. Otherwise, have yourself a wonderful weekend. Thank you.
Thank you.
Wow.